I moved from the United States to Scotland a little over 4 years ago. Scotland is not just castles and rain, it's also lots and lots of booze. Today I'm going to talk about some of the things that I love about living in Scotland, or at least think are really cool. Everybody here uses public transportation, not just poor people or ethnic minorities. I realize that there are some cities in the States that have fair or even good public transportation, but those are few and far between, and the vast majority of Americans don't really have access to good public transportation. While in general I do prefer to drive, I really like having the option of being able to take a bus or a train. And one of the things I really like about Scotland is that if you are under, I think it's 25 years old, your bus passes are free, as well as if you're over 60 or 65, I believe, your bus's passes are also free. So it's a great way to get around without having to spend a whole lot of money. Next up, people are much better drivers. I've taken the driving test twice since I moved here. The first time in an automatic transmission, the second time in a manual transmission vehicle. And I passed both times, but the test was definitely much harder than I remember it being back in the US. The requirements for getting your license and the testing is much more stringent here, and it results in better drivers. Pretty much everyone here has an actual driving instructor, whereas in the US it's fairly common for your parents to just teach you. Obviously not every driver is a good driver, but in general I have found that the drivers here stick to the rules of the road much more often than they do back in the US. Next up are meal deals. Here, most every chain supermarket has a meal deal where you have a selection of like sandwiches, crisps, drinks, etc., and you pick which one of the three you want, or you pick three of them and you get it for £3. It's gone up in price a little bit lately, but that's not really a thing in the US. In every country in the world, I think every country, the number one best-selling drink is Coca-Cola, except for Scotland. Scottish people have what's called Iron Brew. It is made here, it's from Scotland, and it is the number one best-selling non-alcoholic drink, I guess. It's hard to describe the taste because there's not really anything in the US that compares to it. I would say the closest thing would be like bubblegum flavor, but not quite. So if you are visiting Scotland, you definitely need to try it. Another thing that I love about living here is the walkability. In some ways, it's both a pro and a con, depending on how you look at it, especially from maybe an accessibility standpoint. Where I live, it's a little bit more rural, so you can walk everywhere. Driving is typically better. But when you go into Glasgow city centre or any of the more populated areas, it can be challenging to find places to park. Not really a bad thing, to be fair, because I know the US is 100% based around cars and it's pretty much impossible to walk places. But yeah, so there's a little caveat with that. I do love the walkability. At times it can be a bit frustrating not being able to find a place to park. If you're from the UK, you might think that this is not out of the ordinary, but if you're from the US, you might not even know that this is a thing. But here, every home has an electric kettle. In the US, I had an electric kettle, but I don't know if anyone that I knew had an electric kettle. Maybe they're starting to pick up more recently, but in the States, a lot of people, if they make their instant soup or even if they make tea, they use their microwave to heat up the water, which is just wrong. Part of this is also just geography, but I love the closeness to so many other countries. In the US, the vast majority of people don't really travel, which is for many reasons that I'm not going to go into in this video, but people in the States can't really just take day trips to Paris or anywhere else in Europe. In about 3 weeks, I will be going to Germany on holiday for about a week. And my flights to Germany cost less than a train ticket to London. I'm not sure if that's really saying how cheap the flights are or saying how expensive the trains are. But yeah, literally my flight to Germany was cheaper than a train ticket to London. The UK has this weird kind of mixture of the metric system and imperial. And I'm not crazy about it, but I do like that a lot of the things use the metric system because it makes so much more sense. I still have some problems converting temperatures from Celsius to Fahrenheit, but as far as meters, centimeters, etc., kilos, that is so much better than what they use in the US. I'm in Glasgow, so I probably shouldn't say this too loudly, but I don't necessarily support either the Celtics or the Rangers. Football is obviously a big part of the culture here, and I mean real football, not American football. And while I don't really follow it that much, I mainly follow the World Cup and the Euros. When it comes to football, that is the only sport that I know the rules to. I don't know the rules to American football, baseball, basketball, etc. And so it's nice that if I'm at a pub and there's a game playing, I can follow along, or if people are talking about it, I at least know to an extent of what they're talking about. I never have and I never will understand American football, especially. Day drinking is not frowned upon. It is actively encouraged. Now, the laws about alcohol will vary a lot between state to state in the US, and also can vary between city and council here in the UK. But in general, alcohol is not as taboo as it was back in Oklahoma. There are a lot of weird laws in the States, and I know some of these have kind of shifted over the past couple years, but for example, in Oklahoma, for years, you couldn't buy any liquor or beer that was over 6% in a normal shop. You had to go to a dedicated liquor store. They couldn't be open on Sundays, etc. They did change that law a few years back, so now you can buy some of that stuff, like you can buy wine at your normal supermarket, but for years you couldn't do that. There was also a big thing about drinking in public, and I'm not a huge drinker myself, but here, if you are on the train enjoying a beer or a wine, that's fairly normal, whereas if they had trains, you could not do that in Oklahoma. Maybe this is just the childish side of me coming out, but in the US, where you would have like Cool Whip, which unfortunately does not exist here, but if you've got whipped cream that comes in a can, they don't call it what they call it here. Here it is called squirty cream, and I find that fucking hilarious. At some point I'll make a dedicated video to this, but they have so many more colorful expressions and phrases compared to what you would use back home in the US. Also, swearing is much more common here, and the C word can be used as a term of endearment, which I find extremely funny. While the availability of toilets when you're out in public leaves much to be desired, what's really nice is when you do find a toilet, there are no massive gaps in the stalls. In the US, maybe not all of them, but a large percentage of public toilets have massive gaps in the stalls, and it's very easy for anyone to just look in and see what you're doing. And I have not come across any toilets like that the entire time I've lived here. Another thing that I really love about living here is the architecture and the lack of chains, especially in rural areas. Obviously, there is much more history that still exists in the UK compared to the United States. Many of these buildings are older than the United States. And regardless of how you stand on the power that local councils have, they are able to kind of plan a bit more about how things and where things are built. For example, I'm in Glasgow right now, and there are loads of chains around me. Where I live down on the coast, there are none. I have to drive about 30 minutes, 45 minutes to get to the nearest Starbucks. And I think the only fast food restaurant that's fairly close to me is a McDonald's that is about a 15-minute drive away. I live on the coast. I can see the Isle of Arran from my bedroom window. It is beautiful. And every time I drive down the coast and see the beautiful beaches and everything, I kind of think how if this was in the US, there is a good chance that that beach would be covered with Best Westerns, Hiltons, Starbucks, and all of the chain restaurants and coffee shops, etc., that are all over the place in the US. I'm obviously not saying that I'm against chain restaurants and and chains in general. Some of them are problematic, which is a different topic for a different video. But it is cool that I feel like in general here, it's a lot more common that you will see local places, especially in more of the rural areas, compared to what you would see in the US. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, you might enjoy this one where I talk about some of the things that were invented or created in Scotland. I will see you next time.